Hello, in this video we're going to look at part 2 of the listening paper in the Cambridge English Advanced exam. Part 2 is the sentence completion task. Here you listen to a person talk or give an interview, and as they talk you have to complete a set of notes about what they say. Now this is quite an interesting task, and it's one where students can do very well, especially if they are prepared for what will follow. You get some time to listen, about 45 seconds before it begins, and that will give you enough time to read through the questions. For each one, you need to think what kind of language will be expected in the gap. At the most general level, you can try to decide if you want a noun or an adjective. And then beyond that, you might be able to decide if the noun needs to be, for example, a subject of study or a place, something like that. The other thing that you can do before you listen is to try to think of synonymous expressions before the listening begins. What I mean by that is that in a given sentence, the gap will be taken straight from the listening. You don't change it. But the words either side of the gap will be different in the listening. So you need to match what you hear with what you've read in the question. So there is a kind of translation effect that's required. Remember that when you make the notes, they need to be, of course, spelt correctly and written in capitals, but they also need to be grammatically correct in the sentence. Again, this gives you a little clue. For example, if the letter A comes before the gap, so the indefinite article, you will obviously need a singular noun in the gap. If you write a plural, the answer will be wrong. As always, watch out for Cambridge and their distractors. If you see a sentence that says, at first he thought that, they're probably going to mention other things that he thought, but only one of those will be the first thing. Or he will mention other things and then say, but first, so he's linking back to the beginning, and that's what you need to listen for. So these are classics, really. The answers usually aren't that difficult. In fact, they're not supposed to be too difficult. Finding the answers, though, is a different matter entirely. Okay, so now, if you have a look in the description beneath the video, you'll find links to the PDF we're using and the MP3 files, all courtesy of Cambridge Examinations. Download those now if you haven't already. We're looking at sample paper 2. And this task comes on page 67. It's called Jack's Vacation Project. So use those 45 seconds before the listening begins carefully. You might even be able to figure out some of the answers, more or less, from your world knowledge. Try the task, listen twice, and when you're ready, come back here and we'll have a look through the answers together. Okay, so let's take a look. For number 7, it says, Jack says it was his special interest in the issue of something that led him to choose his degree subject. Now, here we need to pay attention to the wording. It's his special interest, not just any, but the special one. So the answer for number 7 is climate change. But if we look back at the listening, before he mentions climate change, he does talk about sustainable energy. He says, I've always wondered how we'll solve problems such as sustainable energy and in particular climate change. It's that in particular that links to the special interest. For number 8, Jack thinks he'll be reluctant to work in the oil industry. Why is that? Well, he says that after graduation he could go on to find a job in areas such as pharmaceuticals, the mobile phone industry, or even in the oil industry. The last of those seems less appealing, and he explains why, but it's the last of those. So we have 2 distractors before the right answer. We have to really listen carefully to the specific information he gives. It's never given to you on a plate. It's never that this is just the one answer that's very easy to see. For number 9, Jack hopes that his future work will help various raw materials to be processed in a better way. So we have this to be processed, and if we listen, he talks about the responsible processing of raw materials. So this is an example of a synonymous expression. For number 10, Jack says that people sometimes mistake pieces of plastic on beaches for small stones. Now, if you didn't write the word small, that's okay. The word stones will get you a point. Small stones would also be correct. So where do we get this from? Well, if we look at the sentence here, it says, people sometimes mistake. We're not going to hear exactly that, but we do hear in the passive, some things are often assumed to be small stones. They do have a name, they are called nurdles, whatever that is, but that's not what we're listening to. We're listening for the information about these stones because that's the mistake people make. Then number 11, Jack says that plastic on beaches which is brown in colour has usually been in the sea longest. Now before the listening started and you were looking through the questions, you probably recognised that you needed an adjective here and that it needed to be a particular colour. Now obviously he's not going to mention just one colour, he mentions many. He talks about the colour that these plastics change to after different periods of time. And then it's finally, the brown ones have generally been in the sea for many years. So it's right in the middle of his list of colours. You have to listen for the specific information. For number 12, Jack uses the term single-use plastics when talking about the kind of items he thinks should be eliminated. He uses the term, so it is what are referred to as single-use plastics. And then in number 13, it was a surfboard, part of a surfboard, that was the most interesting piece of rubbish for him. He talked about different kinds of rubbish he found on the beach, like cartons and drink cans, but clearly these are not interesting to him. He also came across a large chunk off a surfboard. So instead of a piece, it's a chunk. And I did start to wonder what the backstory was there. So here we can very clearly see he's talking about the thing that interested him most. And then finally for number 14, the answer we want is seaweed. He talks about different things that the conservationist Martin told him about on the beach. He told me about the various rocks and shells on the beach before getting me to look closely at the seaweed. So look closely is examine, and that's exactly what we're listening for. So hopefully you managed to get quite a few of those. Be careful of your spelling, as always. But remember, the crucial thing here is to use the time before the listening begins to go through and try to predict some of the information, the kind of information you're going to be listening for. And then as you listen, look for the synonymous expressions and beware of distractors. There are really distractors for at least half of the questions, if not more. And that's it. In the next video, we'll look at part 3 of the listening test, which is the multiple choice listening. Thank you.